Hey guys, Rex here. We're taking a look at the Sightron S-TAC. A lot of guys have been asking about this for quite a while. This is something that we actually got mounted up on this old Ruger M77. This rifle's in 22-250, and we were looking for a scope that would work good for like varmint hunting applications that wouldn't be like too expensive, because you got to match the optic to the rifle for whatever its intended purpose is. A lot of times as purists in the tactical shooting world, we like to force everything into our template, and that's not always the wise way to go. Like we talked about earlier, you got to pick the right tires for your car for the right application. Do you want tires that are like drag racing slicks, or do you want stuff that drives better on the ice? That's what you got to look for, is consider the application. Anytime you're trying to figure out what the good scope is, what the best scope is for whatever you're using, you got to think about what you're trying to accomplish. This particular one is affordable. That's a nice deal. It's also nicely configured. We got 4 to 20 power. So, you know, varmint shooting, especially if you're shooting prey dogs, you got very small targets at kind of longer distances a lot of times. It's nice to have a little more magnification so you can confirm that your aiming point, even if it's a little more blurry than in like a tier 1 optic, when you're cranked up on those high magnifications, you can confirm that your aiming point is right where you need it to be so you can make a nice clean kill on that varmint, right? It's also a 50mm objective lens, 30mm main tube, which is a nice feature for a sporting optic. That's something that I think is highly desirable. And it has target turrets underneath these caps, and the turrets are in units of minute of angle. And it's a 1/4 minute clicks on this scope. We also have the side focus. This is where your parallax focus would be. Now this one isn't labeled like a lot of the parallax knobs are in terms of hundreds of yards, and where it has infinity all the way to however many 100 yards. This just is a universal focus knob. In all reality, guys, those numbers never made up anyways. Very rarely do they actually match. So you just turn it until it's clear, right? And relatively simple. This scope is nicely configured in a classic style. It's got the classic lines to it. And that's something that we should talk about in a video coming out soon too, is how to take a look at the general shape, the general proportions of a rifle scope, and make kind of prejudiced judgments on how that thing is going to perform and what its limitations are going to be. There's a reason for this kind of classic layout. If you look at the geometry of how the optics have to be configured to work the best. And so I kind of like scopes that have the classic layout, because they do work well. Generally speaking, they're easier to get to work well. And we'll talk about that in a future video. I got to track down my guy and get the full story out of him so I can share all the top secret info with you guys. But at any rate, we did test this thing. One thing I was curious about, because anytime you have target turrets on a scope like this, that encourages people to turn them. And if people are turning them on a configuration like this, they should have good tracking precision, right? Like it should go where you want. So what we did is we got this bad boy out there, got it zeroed at just 100 yards on the range there, and we got one of the new Rex grid targets out there so we could do a test to see how close this thing would be tracking, with how much precision. And the new Rex grid targets are pretty cool, guys. If you got a minute of angle scope, we're going to have the mill version coming out some point in the future. Maybe. We'll see how it goes. But the Rex grid, you just aim at the aiming point on the bottom, and then you can adjust up, left, and right wherever you need to while still aiming at that bottom aiming point to see how the thing is tracking, to see if you got reliability in the tracking mechanisms or precision. And it's actually very, very good quality control on those targets. We measure them very closely before we started mass producing them, and they're pretty cool. So we got this out there on the range, and we put it up against one of the Rex grid targets, and I was actually surprised that the elevation turret actually tracked like really good. Held on the bottom aiming point, cranked it up 20 minutes of angle, and it like hit exactly on the 20-minute of angle mark, like exactly right on. I couldn't measure any discernible difference being off, up or down. So that surprised me, because that normally never happens with like over-the-counter sporting scopes made in the Philippines. I never really see that happen. However, I do got good news because I get to tell you a little bit of bad news. On the windage turret, we did not have reliable tracking. It took a little bit of wrestling on the windage turret to kind of get it to fall where we wanted it to go. And what ended up happening was, I think we had to adjust like, to get it zeroed, like a minute and a half to the right or whatever. And it moved like half that distance. We had to double it. And then we had to double it again to get it to move over. And then it started kind of bouncing into place. And so we had a lot of dispersion until the optic got settled in, and then it grouped up real nice and tight again. This rifle actually shoots pretty good. A little bit, maybe a tiny bit over half minute of angle. Not bad for a bone stock pencil-barreled Ruger M77, this like an old model, right? So the tracking on the elevation is nice to see that it was on, but the windage, not so much. Now, I would venture to guess that if I would take a sample size of 50 of these things and take them out, you'd find that maybe for the elevation turret as well. And that just has to do with it's very difficult scopes in this price range to really get everything measured up and matched perfectly. All the little parts and the adjustment mechanisms have to be exactly perfect. So is this something I would use for like tactical applications? I actually wouldn't. But is this something that would be perfect for like prairie dog shooting? That's not going to make you broke, that you still have a nice variable power in a second focal plane configured nicely from a company that's been around for a while? Yeah. So mission accomplished there. To be a purist at heart is good. I can issue the critiques, but also still find the value where it may be hiding, right? And so, yeah, we got to shoot this thing a little bit. One thing I did like about it, though, and from a varmint hunter's perspective, it has a nice, clean, fine reticle. And that's nice. The crosshair is like real nice and fine. And that's one of the nice things about a second focal plane reticle too, is you can crank it all the way up there. Like we said earlier, you still got that fine aiming point. And it was easy to get to be relatively clear. When we got it cranked up, we just tweak the parallax adjustment. You get your diopter set properly from the get-go, and you're set. Now, this one has a little feature on the magnification power ring here. It has, first off, like very, very aggressive, like a grip pattern here. There ain't no slipping off of that at all. It also has a flip-up little tab. You flip it up and you can get some more leverage. I'm careful to employ them too radically. You can sometimes, if there's something that's making this thing sticky, there's a reason for that, and I like to find out what it is, and you don't want to just go cranking on these things beyond what they're designed to do. However, it is nice to have a little bit more leverage if you don't got the hand strength or whatever, But actually, I don't think there was a need for this deal. It's a relatively aggressive grip on here. One thing that this is nice about, though, is you can index this. There's a little dot up on top of here, and if you get that matched up, and we found that we were looking for the spot where the reticle would actually match up to the minutes of angle on the grid, right? And seeing how the reticle was configured. Honestly, the subtensions in the scope I don't think are designed to be very intuitive right off the bat. And also that it was a little bit over 8 power to where it was configured to be on with the grid. And again, at a higher magnification, it was on at a different scale. And so that's something that when you're dealing with second focal plane reticles to begin with, you got to keep in mind that those subtensions are only accurate at certain power settings, right? And if you change the power setting, you have to know exactly how much it changed, and then you have to do the math to convert it. And the problem there is you can put on 16 power, and it ain't actually 16 power in all reality. It's like a little bit past there, a little bit less. They just kind of throw the number on there. In all actuality, that's how the real world works. So if you plan on using subtensions in your reticle, then you probably want to opt for a first focal plane scope, in my opinion. But for varmint hunting applications and for American sportsmen who have no problem just dialing up your elevation on the elevation turret here and taking a few cracks at it, this thing is actually configured very nicely for that. And so there's always trade-offs, right, guys? A little bit less easy to adjust the magnification and still know what the subtensions are, but you do gain the advantage of a nice, crisp aiming point no matter how high you dial up your magnification. So really, it's match it to the application. But the scope was relatively clear for a scope made in the Philippines. I've seen a lot worse, in all honesty. Some stuff really washes out bad. Some stuff, the reticle lights up like a real bright gold if you turn it in the light the wrong way. This steel seemed to be actually pretty nice and clear for most lighting conditions. I mean, if you compare it against any kind of tier 1 glass, especially in low light conditions, you're going to definitely notice a difference there. But for an over-the-counter sporting scope in this price range, it's actually one of the nicer ones. And so that's not a bad deal. One thing about Sightron is, at least in the old days when I used to run them a lot more, I had one on an AR-15 for a long time, and I would actually use it just for varmint shooting. I think it was a 3 to 12 power. And Sightron stands behind their stuff. It's kind of like some of these other modern brands that are pretty good with the warranty. Sightron has a very similar story going on there in terms of their warranty and their customer service. So if you ever did have something that was goofy or broken or didn't work, just let them know. They'll get you squared away and they'll get it fixed or replaced. Most likely they'll just replace it real quick. It's easier and quicker for them to do it that way. And so if you're looking for like a varmint scope, a classic configuration where you have the added features of some target turrets and a nice fine aiming point, this is not a bad way to go, especially for the price point. So if you're next time you're in that Optics Planet territory, just take a look and see what they got going on. They got a lot of neat stuff. This Sightron worked pretty good.
You really thought you'd get away with it, big guy?
Got it. Alpha 9 or Tango 1-3, this is Pirate Lizard King.
Indexing hasty solution to 7.
Yeah.
What in the hell are you holding?
She's not sure.
It's an MP49, that's a saw.
Target's got good cover. What's our danger space for a headshot at TRP-5?
Hi, Mom. It's me and my pals. Say hi, guys.
Yeah, dude. Oh, man.
You're shorter than I expected.
These are super.